Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. The cloudless Montana sky stretched endlessly above as Jake Keller pulled his weathered pickup truck to the side of the gravel road. The engine rattled to a stop, protesting with a final cough before silence settled over the cab. He squinted at the worn piece of paper in his calloused hand, then at the imposing wooden arch that framed the entrance to the Double F Ranch. "This is it," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his dark hair. The wind picked up, sending dust dancing across the road as he stepped out of the truck. At 32, Jake had spent most of his life working other people's land, riding other people's horses, and living paycheck to paycheck. The last cattle operation in Wyoming had folded 3 months ago, leaving him with nothing but his truck, his saddle, and about $200 to his name. The classified ad had been simple. Experienced ranch hand needed. Room and board provided. Inquire at Double F Ranch, Montana. It wasn't much to go on, but it was the only lead he had. As Jake approached the gate, he noticed the quality of the fencing, sturdy cedar posts with tight wire, running as far as he could see in either direction. Whoever owned this place wasn't cutting corners. That could be good or bad. Good if it meant steady pay. Bad if it meant the owner was particular about who they hired. The main house appeared as he rounded a bend in the long driveway. A sprawling, 2-story log structure that looked both imposing and welcoming at the same time. Several outbuildings dotted the property, all in pristine condition. In the distance, he could see cattle grazing on lush pasture land. A woman emerged from the barn as he parked his truck. She wore faded jeans, boots, and a chambray work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, revealing a face that was neither young nor old, perhaps mid-30s, with lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. "You must be looking for work," she called, wiping her hands on a rag as she approached. Jake nodded, suddenly conscious of his worn clothes and the 3-day stubble on his chin. "Yes, ma'am. Name's Jake Keller. I saw your ad." "Amanda Forrester," she replied, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work. Not some soft ranch owner who directed from the porch. Then, "Everyone calls me Mandy." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Forrester." "Mandy," she corrected with a slight smile. "Come on inside. We can talk about the position over some coffee." The interior of the house matched its exterior, comfortable but not ostentatious, with solid furniture and practical touches. The living room opened to a large kitchen with a worn wooden table at its center. "You take it black?" she asked, pouring coffee into heavy mugs. "Yes, ma'am, Mandy," he corrected himself. She smiled slightly as she set the mug before him. "So, Jake Keller, tell me about your experience." For the next hour, Jake outlined his life working ranches across Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado. He spoke of breaking horses, managing herds through harsh winters, and the various skills he'd picked up along the way. Mandy listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her own deep knowledge of ranching operations. "Well," she said finally, "I've got 300 head of cattle, 40 horses including my breeding stock, and about a dozen buildings that need maintenance. The last hand quit 2 weeks ago, family emergency back east. I'm looking for someone who can handle themselves without constant direction." "I'm your man," Jake said without hesitation. Mandy studied him for a long moment. "The bunkhouse has 4 beds, but you'll have it to yourself for now. Meals are here in the main house. Pay is $1,200 a month plus room and board." Jake tried not to show his surprise. It was a generous offer, especially with housing and food included. "That sounds fair." "There's one more thing," Mandy added, her expression serious. "I run this place alone. Have done for 5 years since my father passed. If you've got any problem taking orders from a woman, we should end this conversation now." Jake met her gaze steadily. "Ma'am, Mandy, I've worked for all kinds of bosses. All I care about is whether they know what they're doing and if they treat their people fair." She nodded, seemingly satisfied. "You can start tomorrow. The bunkhouse is the small cabin past the equipment shed. There's linens in the trunk at the foot of each bed. Pick whichever one you want." Jake stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't let you down." As Mandy shook his hand, Jake couldn't help but notice the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "We'll see," she replied, but there was a warmth in her voice that hadn't been there before. That night, As Jake settled into the surprisingly comfortable bunkhouse, he reflected on his new employer. Mandy Forrester was clearly competent and no-nonsense, but there was something else about her that intrigued him. A sadness, perhaps, or a wariness that he recognized in himself. The look of someone who had learned to be self-sufficient because they had no other choice. The next morning began before dawn. Jake was already dressed and heading toward the main house when he saw Mandy emerging from the barn, a lantern in her hand. "Morning," she called. "Coffee's on in the kitchen. Breakfast in 20 minutes, then I'll show you around." The tour of the Double F was comprehensive. They rode for hours, with Mandy pointing out boundary lines, water sources, and areas that needed attention. Jake was impressed by the operation. Everything was well-maintained and thoughtfully designed. "This is quite a spread," he commented as they paused on a ridge overlooking a valley where cattle grazed. "How long has it been in your family?" A shadow passed over Mandy's face. "My great-grandfather started with 50 acres and 10 head of cattle. Each generation added to it. My father was particularly ambitious." There was something in her tone that made Jake curious, but he didn't press. Instead, he asked practical questions about the rotation of pastures and the health of the herd. Days turned into weeks, and Jake fell into the rhythm of life at the Double F. The work was hard but satisfying, and Mandy proved to be a fair employer. She worked alongside him most days, never asking him to do anything she wouldn't do herself. They settled into a comfortable routine. Breakfast together in the morning, where they would plan the day's work. Then they would go their separate ways, handling different tasks around the ranch, before coming together again for dinner in the evening. It was during these evening meals that Jake began to learn more about Mandy. She was guarded about her personal life, but occasionally she would share stories about growing up on the ranch, learning to ride before she could walk, and helping her father with the business. "He was a good man," she said one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Tough, but fair. He taught me everything I know about ranching." "He did a good job," Jake said sincerely. "This is one of the best-run operations I've seen." Mandy smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her face and made Jake's heart skip a beat. "Thank you. That means a lot." As spring turned to summer, Jake found himself looking forward to these quiet moments with Mandy more than he cared to admit. There was something about her strength, her quiet competence, and the rare moments when her guard came down that drew him to her. One evening in late July, they were riding back to the ranch house after checking on a pregnant mare when a summer storm rolled in with startling speed. The sky darkened, and fat raindrops began to fall. "Line shacks closer than the house," Mandy called over the rising wind. "This way." They rode hard through the intensifying rain, reaching a small cabin just as lightning split the sky. Inside, the shack was basic but dry, with a small wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and supplies for emergencies. "Well, this is cozy," Jake said, trying to lighten the mood as they removed their dripping jackets. Mandy smiled wryly. "I've waited out worse in here. Let me get a fire going." As she knelt by the wood stove, Jake noticed for the first time how the wet fabric of her shirt clung to her shoulders, revealing the gentle curve of her spine. He quickly looked away, busying himself with hanging their soaked hats on hooks by the door. The storm raged outside while inside. The small cabin grew warm and comfortable. They sat at the table, drinking coffee from the emergency supplies and talking as the hours passed. Perhaps it was the intimacy of the setting, or maybe it was the howling wind that made the world beyond the cabin walls seem distant, but Mandy began to open up as she never had before. "My mother left when I was 12, she said, staring into her coffee cup. "Couldn't stand the isolation," she said. "Wanted more than a life of dirt and cattle." Jake nodded, understanding. "Ranch life isn't for everyone." "No, it's not. But it's all I've ever wanted." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "After she left, it was just me and Dad. He threw himself into expanding the ranch, and I threw myself into learning everything I could to help him." "Is that why the Double F is so large? Your father's expansion?" Mandy hesitated, then nodded. "Among other reasons. He was always looking ahead, planning for the future." "My future?" She fell silent for a moment, then added softly. "He wanted to make sure I'd never want for anything." There was more to the story, Jake sensed, but he didn't push. Instead, he shared some of his own past, growing up in a small town in Wyoming, losing his parents in a car accident when he was 19, and the years of drifting from ranch to ranch afterward. Never found a place that felt like home, he admitted. Always just passing through. And now? Mandy asked, her voice soft. Jake met her gaze, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, of the way the firelight played across her features. Now, he said slowly, I'm starting to think maybe I've been looking in the wrong places. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then a loud crack of thunder made them both jump, breaking the spell. Mandy stood abruptly. We should try to get some sleep. Storm might pass by morning. She went to a trunk in the corner and pulled out blankets. You can take the cot. I'll use the chair. I can't let you. It's fine, Jake. I've slept in worse places. Despite his protests, Mandy insisted, and eventually Jake gave in, though he felt guilty as he stretched out on the narrow cot while she settled into the chair, wrapped in a blanket. He lay awake long into the night, listening to the storm and thinking about the woman sleeping just a few feet away from him. He'd known Mandy Forrester for only a few months, but somehow she had become important to him in a way no one had in years. It was more than attraction, though there was certainly that. It was respect, admiration, and a growing affection that he wasn't sure what to do with. The next morning dawned clear and fresh. They rode back to the ranch house in companionable silence, both perhaps a little uncertain after the intimacy of the previous night. As the summer progressed, Jake found himself watching Mandy when she wasn't looking. The way she moved with natural grace, the quiet authority in her voice when giving instructions, the rare but beautiful smile that transformed her serious face. He began to notice other things too. The way neighboring ranchers treated her with a deference that seemed excessive for a medium-sized operation. The quality of her breeding stock, which was exceptional even by the high standards of Montana ranchers. The fact that her cattle grazed on land that seemed to extend far beyond what he'd initially seen of the Double F. One afternoon in late August, Jake was fixing fence on the far eastern boundary when a truck pulled up. A middle-aged man in an expensive hat stepped out, looking surprised to see him. You must be the new hand Mandy hired, the man said, extending his hand. Bill Cooper. I own the neighboring spread to the east. Jake introduced himself, noting that Cooper seemed to be studying him with unusual interest. How are you finding it, working for Miss Forrester? Cooper asked casually. No complaints, Jake replied, matching the man's tone. She runs a tight operation. Cooper chuckled. That she does. Her father taught her well. He glanced around, as if checking that they were alone, then added, must be interesting, working for the richest woman in 3 counties. Jake kept his face neutral, though his mind was racing. Every boss has their quirks. Quirks? Cooper laughed outright. That's one way to put it. Well, you tell Mandy I stopped by about that water rights issue. She'll know what I mean. As Cooper drove away, Jake stood motionless, processing this new information. The richest woman in 3 counties? It didn't match the Mandy he knew, who worked from dawn till dusk, who patched her own jeans, who seemed to value practicality above all else. That evening at dinner, Jake was quieter than usual, turning over Cooper's words in his mind. Mandy noticed. Something on your mind? She asked as they cleaned up after the meal. Jake hesitated, then decided on directness. Met Bill Cooper today while fixing the east fence line. He mentioned something about water rights. Mandy's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Bill always has something to say about water rights. What else did he tell you? Not much, Jake replied carefully. Just seemed to think you were well off. Mandy set down the plate she was drying, her movements deliberate. Does that matter to you? No, Jake said honestly. Just curious why you never mentioned it. She studied him for a long moment. Would it have changed anything if I had? No, he repeated. But it might explain why your coffee is so much better than any other ranch I've worked on. The tension broken, Mandy laughed, a genuine sound that made Jake smile in response. That's because I don't buy the cheap stuff. Life's too short for bad coffee. They didn't discuss it further that night, but a week later, Mandy approached Jake as he was working in the stables. I need to go check some property about 50 miles north, she said. Thought you might want to come along, see more of the operation. They set out early the next morning in Mandy's truck, driving through beautiful country as the sun rose higher in the sky. Jake noticed they passed several boundary markers with the Double F brand, but said nothing. After about an hour's drive, They turned onto a well-maintained dirt road that led to another ranch house, smaller than the main house, but still substantial. A man in his 60s emerged from a barn as they pulled up. "Morning, Miss Forrester," he called. "Right on time as usual." "Morning, Ray," Mandy replied. "This is Jake Keller, my new hand at the main property." "Jake, this is Ray Simmons. He manages this section of the ranch." Ray shook Jake's hand with a firm grip. "Heard good things about you from the boss here. She doesn't impress easy." They spent the day touring the northern property, which ran another 5,000 acres and supported several hundred head of cattle. Ray clearly ran a tight operation, and the respect between him and Mandy was evident. As they drove back that evening, Jake finally asked the question that had been on his mind all day. "How big is the Double F exactly?" Mandy kept her eyes on the road. "The main property you've been working is about 8,000 acres. The northern section you saw today is another 5,000. There's a western section of about 7,000 acres that my cousin manages, and a southern property of about 10,000 acres that's mostly leased out right now." Jake did the quick math. "That's 30,000 acres. Give or take." Mandy agreed, her tone carefully neutral. "That's a lot of land." She glanced at him briefly. "Does it change anything?" Jake considered the question seriously. Did it change how he felt about Mandy? The woman who worked alongside him from dawn till dusk, who could outride most men he knew, who treated her animals and her employees with equal respect. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't change anything important." Mandy's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good. Because I'm still the same person I was yesterday." "I know that," Jake assured her. "I'm just trying to understand why you never mentioned it." She was quiet for so long that Jake thought she might not answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft against the hum of the engine. "When you grow up with money, you learn quickly that it changes how people see you. After my father died, there were plenty of men suddenly interested in the poor widow with the big ranch. None of them saw me, just the land and the inheritance." She gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I got tired of wondering if people were genuine or if they just wanted something from me." Jake nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "So when I showed up looking for work, I wanted to see what kind of man you were when you thought I was just a regular rancher struggling to make ends meet," Mandy confirmed. "And you know what? You treated me with the same respect on day one as you did after months of working together. That matters to me, Jake." The use of his first name, spoken with such warmth, sent a flutter through Jake's chest. "You could own half the state and you'd still be the most genuine person I've ever met, Mandy Forrester." Her smile, illuminated briefly by the dashboard lights as they drove through the gathering dusk, was worth more than all her acres. The revelation about Mandy's true circumstances didn't change their day-to-day interactions, but it did help Jake understand certain things better, like why neighboring ranchers deferred to her opinion, or why she could afford to pay her hand so well. As summer faded into fall, the work on the ranch intensified as they prepared for winter. Jake found himself working closely with Mandy most days, and their easy camaraderie deepened into something more profound. They moved in sync, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with glances and nods as much as with words. One crisp October evening, they were riding back after moving cattle to a sheltered pasture when Mandy suddenly reined in her horse. "Look," she said softly, pointing to the western sky where the sunset painted the clouds in brilliant golds and fiery reds. They sat side by side on their horses, watching in companionable silence as the colors deepened and the first stars appeared. "My father used to say that moments like these were God's way of reminding us why we work so hard," Mandy said finally. "All the cold mornings, all the long days, all the worry. It's worth it for views like this." He was right. Jake agreed. But he found himself watching Mandy's profile rather than the sunset, the gentle curve of her cheek, the way the fading light caught in her hair. She turned, catching him looking at her, and for once, she didn't glance away. Their eyes held, and Jake felt a shift in the air between them, a current of possibility that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had always been there, unacknowledged. "Jake," she began, her voice unusually hesitant. But whatever she had been about to say was interrupted by the sharp ring of her cell phone. The moment broken, Mandy answered the call, her expression quickly shifting to concern. "We'll be right there," she said, ending the call and turning to Jake. "That was Ray. One of the pregnant Mares at the North property is having trouble. The vet's on his way, but Ray could use extra hands. They rode hard back to the ranch house, swapped their horses for Mandy's truck, and drove to the northern property. The next several hours were a blur of activity as they worked with Ray and the veterinarian to help deliver the foal. It was a difficult birth, but by midnight, a wobbly-legged colt was nursing from his exhausted mother. "He's going to be just fine," the vet assured them as he packed up his equipment. "Good work, everyone." Too tired to drive back that night, they stayed in the guest rooms at the northern property's ranch house. Jake lay awake for a long time, thinking about the almost moment with Mandy before the interruption, wondering what she had been about to say. The next morning, they drove back to the main ranch in a comfortable silence, both perhaps a little shy after the intimacy of the previous evening. The moment on horseback felt fragile somehow, too significant to reference casually. Life on the ranch continued, with the pace of work never slowing as winter approached. Jake found himself watching Mandy more often, noticing the small details that made her who she was, her habit of chewing her bottom lip when she was thinking, the way she always checked on the horses one last time before turning in for the night, how she remembered the names and quirks of every animal on the ranch. In late November, the first major snowstorm of the season hit, blanketing the ranch in white. After a long day of checking on cattle and making sure water sources remained accessible, Jake and Mandy returned to the main house, cold and tired but satisfied with their work. "I'm making chili," Mandy announced as they stamped snow from their boots in the mudroom. "And there's apple pie from Mrs. Henderson in town." "Sounds perfect," Jake said, hanging up his coat. "Need any help?" They worked together in the kitchen, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of people who have shared a space for months. As Mandy chopped onions, Jake told a story about a particularly stubborn mule he'd once encountered, making her laugh despite her watery eyes. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace with coffee, listening to the wind howl outside. The fire cast a warm glow over the room, making it feel intimate and separate from the cold world beyond the windows. "I got a call from Cooper today," Mandy said after a while. "He's selling his property, moving to Arizona for his wife's health." Jake nodded, waiting for her to continue. "His ranch borders our eastern pastures. About 6,000 acres. She sipped her coffee. "I'm thinking of buying it." "Makes sense," Jake said. "Good water access, decent grazing land." Mandy looked at him over the rim of her mug. "Would you be interested in managing it? As a separate operation from the main ranch?" Jake stared at her, caught off guard. "Managing it? You've more than proven yourself these past months," Mandy said. "You know ranching inside and out. I trust your judgment. The property includes a nice house, newer than this one actually. The pay would be better, of course, and you'd have more autonomy." Jake set his coffee down slowly, processing her words. "That's a generous offer." "It's a practical one," Mandy replied, but there was an uncertainty in her eyes that Jake had rarely seen. "You're the best hand I've had in years. I'd rather give you room to grow than lose you to another outfit." "Is that the only reason?" Jake asked quietly, holding her gaze. The question hung in the air between them. Mandy set her own mug down, her hands not quite steady. "No," she admitted finally. "That's not the only reason." Jake moved closer to her on the couch, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, to notice the slight trembling of her lips. "Mandy," he said softly, "I don't want to manage another property. I don't want more money or more autonomy." Her eyes searched his. "What do you want, Jake?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I want to stay right here, with you." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then Mandy closed the distance, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was tentative at first, then increasingly confident as Jake responded, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Mandy rested her forehead against his. "I wasn't sure if you felt the same way," she whispered. Jake chuckled softly. "I've been falling for you since that first storm when we took shelter in the line shack. Maybe even before that." She smiled, a full, radiant smile that transformed her face. "And here I thought I was being so professional." "Professional, yes," Jake agreed, tracing the line of her jaw with his finger. "But also kind, intelligent, hard-working, and beautiful." They talked long into the night, the fire burning down to embers as they shared hopes and fears that had gone unspoken for months. Jake learned about the loneliness Mandy had felt since her father's death, the pressure of managing such a large operation alone, and her wariness of letting anyone close after several painful experiences with men who had valued her property more than her person. In turn, he told her about his years of drifting, never finding a place that felt like home, and how working at the Double F had changed something fundamental in him, had given him a sense of belonging he'd thought he might never find. "I didn't hire you because I needed the help," Mandy confessed as the night grew late. "I have managers on all the properties. I could have hired 3 more if I wanted to. I hired you because I was lonely, and you looked at me like I was just a woman, not a fortune with a face." Jake pulled her closer. "You are just a woman to me, Mandy. The most extraordinary woman I've ever met, but still just a woman. The land, the cattle, the money, none of that matters compared to who you are." As winter settled over Montana, Jake and Mandy's relationship deepened. They still worked side by side during the days, maintaining the professional relationship necessary to run the ranch efficiently. But evenings and nights were theirs alone, filled with conversations that lasted until dawn, shared dreams, and a physical intimacy that felt as natural as breathing. Jake moved from the bunkhouse to the main house, though they kept the change quiet at first, not wanting to fuel gossip among the neighboring ranchers. By spring, however, their relationship was an open secret in the county. Jake found himself treated with a new respect by the local ranchers, partly because of his association with Mandy, but also because he had proven himself to be a skilled rancher in his own right. One evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mandy turned to Jake with a serious expression. "Cooper's place is still for sale," she said. "I'm still thinking of buying it." Jake nodded, unsurprised. It was a logical expansion for the Double F. "But I've been thinking," she continued, "maybe we could put it in both our names." Jake stared at her, not sure he had heard correctly. "Both our names." Mandy took his hand, her expression vulnerable in a way he rarely saw. "I love you, Jake. I want to build a life with you, not as my employee, but as my partner. In everything." Jake felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed him of words. He pulled her close, kissing her deeply before resting his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said softly. "But Mandy, I don't need my name on a deed to know that we're partners. I don't want you to think that I know," she interrupted gently. "I know you don't care about the land or the money. That's exactly why I want to share it with you. Because you love me for me, not for what I own." She squeezed his hand. "But there's something else I want to share with you too." Mandy reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. Opening it revealed a simple gold band with a small, perfect diamond. "This was my grandmother's," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "My father gave it to my mother, and she left it behind when she left us. Dad kept it for me, said I should give it to someone who would never leave." Her eyes met Jake's, filled with love and certainty. "I want you to have it, Jake. I want you to be my husband." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. This strong, independent woman who owned more land than most people would see in a lifetime was looking at him with vulnerability and hope, offering him not just her worldly possessions, but her heart. "Yes," he said simply, drawing her into his arms. "Nothing would make me happier than being your husband, Mandy Forrester." They were married that summer in a simple ceremony on the ranch, attended by employees from all the Double F properties and neighboring ranchers who had known Mandy since childhood. Ray Simmons from the northern property served as best man, his gruff exterior softening as he spoke of how right Jake and Mandy were for each other. As Jake stood with his new wife under the same big Montana sky that had witnessed their first meeting, he marveled at the journey that had brought him here. He had arrived at the Double F with nothing but his truck, his saddle, and the clothes on his back, looking for nothing more than honest work and a paycheck. Instead, he had found a home, a purpose, and a love deeper than he had ever imagined possible. The poor cowboy who had taken a job with a ranch woman, not knowing she owned half the state they rode on, had found the one thing money couldn't buy, someone to share his life with, through whatever fortune or hardship might come their way. As they danced under the stars that night, surrounded by friends who had become family, Jake whispered in Mandy's ear, "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter." Mandy smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story. "Thank you for seeing me, not my land. For loving me, not what I own." The land is beautiful, Jake admitted, spinning her gently, but not half as beautiful as its owner. And as they moved together under the vast Montana sky, both knew they had found something far more valuable than all the acres of the Double F combined. They had found each other, and in doing so, had found home.